In today's podcast, we're going to discuss a question that every leader must answer. And that is, how am I going to most effectively lead with my natural wiring? We all have to lead, be it at work, at home. Worst case scenario, you're the first to arrive at a car accident. We all are called to lead. And today, we're going to help you define your leadership identity, which is how you can most effectively lead with your natural style.
Stop me when I'm passing by. On my mind, your eyes remain. Stop me when.
Thank you for tuning into the Stop to Vanilla podcast. Here at Stop to Vanilla, we want to be a resource for you to achieve your business, your career, and your life goals. And here are some recent resources for you to do that. First of all, we're offering a free work-at-home assessment. With COVID-19 going on right now, we're all working virtually. And this free assessment tells you what your communication preferences are, and then it tells you how to communicate virtually with your teammates that may have different styles. It's a really powerful tool, and we're offering it free to give back to our listeners during the COVID-19 crisis. So look in the show notes for that. Second thing is we have a virtual and hopefully an in-person training, Shepherd of the Talent training coming up in September. Shepherd of the Talent is one of our most popular trainings. It's also one of our most liked trainings as well, because we train leaders, company leaders, human resource leaders, team leaders on the behavioral sciences, and then we train them on all the talent processes in an organization and how to use the science to make the right hire the first time, develop leadership development process, team development, and all the different things, all the talent processes in an organization. And then they leave here with all the knowledge and tools and templates to develop their talent in their organization. And just let us know how we can be a resource during these challenging times we're going through. Email us at info@stoptovanilla.com, and we'd love to help any way we can. All right, so let's get into our topic today on how do you define and, most importantly, live your leadership identity. So how did this concept of leadership identity come to being? You know, I've done thousands of leadership development processes, and when we're in the second session, there's 3 sessions in an effective leadership development process. The second session is where we really dive into the behavioral science results of a leader, and we use 4 sciences here at Stop to Vanilla to help leaders have awareness and also to develop their leadership development priorities. The first science we use is DISC and behavioral style, and that's what I'm going to focus on today. We also use driving forces. What are your motivators? We use soft skills, and we use emotional intelligence. But the leadership identity is really centered around your DISC, or your natural behavioral style is what we call it, because that's what it measures. It measures how you behave naturally. Now, every person in your life, every person you know has a natural behavioral style, and they're all different. Everybody has a different style. Every person in your life, from your direct reports to your leader, to your significant other, to your kids, every person in your life has a natural behavioral style that we can now measure through the DISC behavioral science. And so when we understand how to use that natural wiring to most effectively lead, that's when we become the best leader that we can be. Leadership identity is defined as, how do I most effectively lead with my natural behavioral style? Now, we all have leaders in our life that were awesome leaders, great leaders. I mean, I can think of a couple leaders that I just loved working for. But it's difficult for us to emulate that leader's style because they're wired differently than we are. And so there may be some qualities that you can take out of that leader's style, but it all comes down to how you're naturally wired. Your natural wiring is in place by the time you're 10, 11 years old in your adolescent years, and it's unlikely to change in your lifetime. So the sooner that you understand your style and own your style, the sooner you can define that leadership identity. Now, many of you have taken your DISC graph, and you know what that is, and I'd encourage you to get it out to listen to this podcast if you can. If you've never taken a DISC graph, look in the show notes and communicate with us about how you can understand your natural behavioral style. So every person has a natural behavioral style, and all of us are called to lead. at work and at home. And so how do you most effectively lead with your natural behavioral style? Now in the DISC science, there's 4 key characteristics. The first one is the D, that stands for dominance, the I, that stands for influence, the S, that stands for steady, and the C, that stands for compliance. And it's spelled DISC. Many people, again, know it as the DISC behavioral science. We call it here your natural behavioral style because, again, it's how you're wired, and it's not going to change. And so I'm going to walk through each of those styles, and the style that you have the most intensity in, that is your lead characteristic of your style, that's really where you want to define your leadership identity. So we're going to go through each characteristic of the DISC and define your leadership identity for each of those characteristics. So the first one is the D. And this is someone who is comfortable with tough conversations, somebody who can stand up for what they believe in. High Ds are typically very visionary. They can see out further than someone that maybe has a lower dominance factor. And so Ds usually lead through being very visionary, painting a picture of where we want the organization to be. Now, one of typically the blind spots of high Ds is that they don't always bring people with them. They don't always sell a person on that vision. And so how does a high D lead with their style? It's really getting that vision down on paper and making sure that you bring other people with you on the vision, right? Your task orientation is high, your vision orientation is high, but your people orientation may have a tendency to be a little bit lower. And so you see the vision, you understand the vision, but now your identity is to really share that with other people. Inspire them to the same vision. Bring them along with you and get things done through other people to achieve your vision. High Ds typically are very strong individual performers, but oftentimes have to really work hard at bringing the team with them. And so the leadership identity for a high dominance factor is using that visionary skill that you have, but making sure that you build connected relationships and bring the rest of the team with you on that journey to achieve that vision. I have a high D in my style, and our team clearly understands the vision of our organization and where we want to go and what we want to become. That is the strength of my style. And one of the areas that I have to make sure I stay focused on is bringing them with me, making sure they understand the vision and what we need to do next to get that done. Now, I recently worked, last week, I was coaching through a virtual leadership development session. I was coaching a high D, and his leadership identity is getting things done through other people, through connected relationships. The getting things done part comes naturally. Building those connected relationships is something that he has to work really hard at, and we put a ton of action plans in his development plan to make sure that he gets things done through other people and with other people. And that's his leadership identity. So he's going to leverage his strengths and overcome the blind spots of his style to most effectively lead with his style. That's what leadership identity is, right? It's how do we most effectively lead with who we are as a person. So that's the D style. The I, someone that has a high I is typically very extroverted, very outgoing, very, very talented at building connected and deep relationships. High I's know a lot of people. And they typically have a lot of friends and build a lot of great relationships. And so how does a high I lead most effectively? They lead most effectively by building a connected team, building high performance relationships, connected relationships, but they usually have to rely on systems and processes to overcome the blind spots of their style, right? So in their style, they have this high I, typically a high I, high S come together, and their detail orientation, their task orientation is lower. And so they lead through connected relationships, but rely on systems and processes to overcome the blind spots of their style. So last week, again, I was coaching another leader that has a very high I in her style, and her leadership identity, we defined it as the following. It's to lead through connected relationships in a high-performance team, which is her strength, that proactively accomplishes tasks and goals through consistent use of processes and systems. So she needs to use processes and systems to overcome the blind spots of her style to most effectively lead with her style. So one example of that is department planning. So she leads a department, and one of the systems she's going to put in place is to make sure that she has a department plan in place all the time. That it's constantly laid out who's going to get what done by when. because by having a plan in her department, it overcomes the blind spots of her style. It's tougher for her to have those tough conversations, hold people accountable. That all just became a lot easier because she has a talent, because she has a department plan in place. So again, leadership identity is how do we leverage the strengths of your style in your leadership, but how do we overcome the blind spots? And for her, it was leveraging the strengths of her relationships while putting systems in place to make sure that she overcomes the blind spots of her lower task and detail orientation. So that's the high I style. The high S style is someone that leads through connected relationships with those they know, but typically does it through leading by example. High S's like to lead by example. They show up early, they work a lot, they stay late, they lead by example. So a lot of times high S's, the strengths of their style, they're great listeners, they're great coaches. I mean, people want to run through a wall for high S leaders because they're great listeners. They care for you. They have a pace that allows you to, be comfortable around them. And they're just, and they get a lot done in a given day. They're very task oriented. And so high S's, the strengths of their leadership style is that they will build an incredible culture. They will lead through example. But again, on occasion, they may have lower task orientation and a lower dominance factor. So how do they then make sure that things are getting done with their natural behavioral style? So putting systems and processes in place that get things done to ensure that they backfill for their blind spots. So that is the high S style. It's leading by example, but making sure we have the tough conversations and putting systems in place to make sure people that are held accountable. And the last factor of the DISC style is the C. And that's someone who leads through detail and their technical ability, right? So they got a high C in their style, so they're very detail-oriented, typically an expert in their field. And we always call this leadership identity leading through the C. Leading through the C. So they're leading through the detail. They're leading through their detail orientation. High C's aren't going to be these visionary thinkers. They're not going to have this natural drive and gas pedal. So they lead through their detail orientation. They lead by having a detailed plan in place, using the strengths of their detail to make sure everybody understands who's going to get what done by when. And so leading through detail by having a detailed plan in place now makes the weaknesses or the blind spots of their style easier to overcome. So we often call it leading with the C. So those of you that have a high C in your behavioral style, how can you lead with your detail orientation? And it's typically by being very buttoned up in everything that's going to get done over the next 4-month sprint. So that is really leadership identity at its core. It's understanding what the strongest characteristic of your leadership style is, your natural behavioral style, and making sure you leverage the strengths of that style and you overcome the blind spots of that style. So what is your natural behavioral style or DISC? And understanding that and how to lead with that is what leadership identity is all about. Some of us at times may have what we call style envy. And that's where we want to be more like this leader or that leader, right? Style envy. He or she is an incredible leader and I want to lead like that. But they're likely wired very differently than you are. So here at Stop to Vanilla, we always are coaching away from style envy. Let's not be envious of other people's leadership style. Let's respect it. Let's follow it. Let's learn from it. But recognize that you are wired uniquely. You are wired individually. And understanding how you most effectively lead with your natural behavioral style will make you as effective as that leader that you want to emulate because you're doing it what comes naturally to you. You're doing it with the strengths of who you are. And that is the power of leadership identity. I mean, there's rarely a leadership development process that we don't have this discussion around leadership identity. Because again, we all are wired differently. And we can't lead the same as other people do. We have to lead with our unique style. And that's really what I want to encourage you today, is to define and live your leadership identity. And this will be a game changer for you because you're leading naturally versus trying to force how you want to lead like somebody else. And that is a huge takeaway from this. Now, There's many positive outcomes of understanding and living your leadership identity. You will lead most effectively with your style because it's what comes natural to you, right? You're going to lead with your strengths, and you're going to minimize and overcome the blind spots of your natural style. And then once you have the self-awareness and you've defined and are living your leadership identity, then you have the responsibility to help others define their leadership identity, right? To shepherd the talent, to help us all understand how we can most effectively lead, because all of us are challenged to lead in many facets of our life. So if you know your DISC style, define how you're most effectively going to lead with it. It's typically 1 or 2 sentences. I'm going to leverage the strengths of my style in this area, and here's how I'm going to overcome the blind spots in this area. If you do not know your DISC, I'd recommend that the sooner you understand your DISC, the sooner you can own it, and the sooner you can more effectively lead with it. And you can email us at info@stopthevanilla.com, and we can help you get a DISC assessment. We also want to offer, for anybody that leaves a review for this podcast, we will offer a free DISC assessment. We'll select maybe 5 to 10 people that leave a review, and we'll send you a link for a free DISC assessment so that you can define your leadership identity. I can't tell you how important this leadership identity concept has come to me, especially lately, because I'm doing a ton of virtual leadership development coaching with COVID-19 going on. And just like last week, I had 5 coaching sessions, and every individual had a different behavioral style, and every individual's leadership identity was different. And that's the key takeaway from this podcast. Define and live your leadership identity, because you have a unique behavioral style. And when you do that, you will become an incredibly effective leader that other leaders want to emulate as well. So thank you for listening to today's podcast. It's my hope and expectation that you will become a better leader, because not only have you defined it, but you are living your leadership identity. And let us know how all of us at Stop the Vanilla can help you achieve your business, your career, and your life goals with the right plan and the right talent.
I'm your ice cream man, stop me when I'm passing by. Oh my, I'm your ice cream man, stop me when I'm passing by.